My father took my brother, my mother took my sister, and I was left in state care. Years later, they all tried to return to my life, but I was no longer the same child they'd walked away from. Can you imagine being 8 years old, watching your entire family shatter before your eyes? My dad packed my brother, my mom packed my sister, and when the dust settled, the devastating truth hit me. Nobody took me. For over 2 decades, they disappeared, leaving me alone in a world of strangers. Now, out of nowhere, they've all suddenly decided they want back into my life, expecting to find the same desperate, abandoned child. But let me tell you, that little girl is long gone. In her place stands a woman who built herself piece by agonizing piece, from the ground up. And trust me, this journey gets intense. Before everything imploded, we were, by all appearances, a perfectly normal family. We lived in a cozy brick ranch house in suburban Chicago, complete with a tire swing my dad, Jack, hung from the massive oak tree in our backyard. I can still close my eyes and see the evening sun filtering through the leaves, casting dancing shadows on our small lawn where Rusty, our golden retriever, would chase us in endless, joyful circles. My dad, a construction contractor, smelled of sawdust and mint gum, a scent that always meant comfort. When he'd scoop me up, my mom, Diane, a part-time nurse, had this infectious laugh that would start soft and build until her whole body shook with it. She'd let me brush her dark blonde hair at night, counting 100 strokes like storybook princesses. My brother, Noah, was 10 when our lives changed forever. He was my protector, the one who taught me to ride a bike by running beside me, cheering wildly when I finally pedaled on my own. Sophie, my little sister, was just 6. She had wispy blonde curls and followed me everywhere. I'd read her bedtime stories, doing silly voices, until she drifted off, clutching her worn-out stuffed elephant. Ellie, our home wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, yellow curtains my mom sewed herself, mismatched chairs my dad refinished. Sundays meant pancakes, Dad flipping perfect golden circles, Mom slicing fruit, Noah sneaking chocolate chips into the batter, Sophie giggling. I, at 8, was in charge of setting the table, feeling so grown up. Summer trips to Lake Michigan, building sandcastles, Mom reading under an umbrella, Dad teaching Noah and me to swim. Nights, exhausted and sun-kissed, eating ice cream as the sunset painted the sky. I remember my 8th birthday party, a rainbow cake, balloons everywhere, friends playing freeze tag. Dad set up a sprinkler, Mom took pictures. I felt so loved, so special, completely oblivious that this would be our last celebration as an intact family. Looking back, the small signs of trouble were there, but I was too young to recognize them. Dad's work fluctuating, quiet conversations behind closed doors, Mom's tight smile when bills arrived. But children don't notice these things until they become impossible to ignore. Our home was once secure, warm, filled with the magic of family. Game nights, sharing our day's best moments, Mom's flowery perfume as she kissed our foreheads. These were the foundations of my world, a world I believed was as solid as the brick walls of our house. I didn't know then that foundations can crack, that homes built on love can still collapse. I couldn't have imagined a future where the 5 of us would become strangers, or that I would be the one left behind when everyone else moved on. Those memories are both precious and incredibly painful, a constant reminder of everything I lost and everything I had to rebuild on my own. The first real crack appeared when Dad lost a major construction contract he'd been banking on. I remember the night he came home hours late, his face gray with defeat. Mom sent us kids to the basement, but their voices, sharp and accusatory, carried right through the floorboards. How could you have banked everything on this one job, Jack? Mom's voice, a tone I'd never heard from her before. It was a sure thing, Diane. How was I supposed to know they'd go with another company at the last minute? Dad boomed back, defensive and raw. That night, I heard Mom crying in their bedroom, soft, muffled sobs. Dad slept on the couch. Breakfast, the next morning, was silent, the tension thick enough to touch. In the weeks that followed, Mom started taking extra nursing shifts. She'd leave before we woke, and sometimes return after we were in bed. Her absence created a hollow space. No one there to help with homework, no one to listen to our school stories. Dad tried to fill both roles, but he was constantly distracted, on the phone, desperately trying to secure new contracts while bills piled up on the kitchen counter. One night, I got up for a glass of water and overheard Dad on the phone, his voice a harsh whisper. I don't know how we're going to make the mortgage this month. The savings are gone, and Diane's extra shifts barely cover the utilities. The fear in his voice twisted my stomach into knots. Noah withdrew, spending more time in his room. He stopped inviting friends over, quit his baseball team, claiming he wasn't interested. But I caught him staring at his gloves sometimes, fingers tracing the worn leather with longing. Sophie started having nightmares, screaming about monsters. I'd crawl in beside her, stroking her hair until she fell back asleep, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure I believed anymore. Our parents were too wrapped up in their own struggles to notice how we were all reacting. Christmas that year was a shadow of past celebrations. No tree, no presents, just a small dinner Mom prepared between shifts, where our parents barely spoke. Noah picked at his food while Sophie asked repeatedly when Santa was coming, questions our parents deflected until she finally stopped asking. In January, my grandparents visited. I overheard them talking to my parents in hushed, concerned tones, offering help. Whatever it was, my parents refused. My father's pride, still intact despite everything else crumbling around us. We'll figure this out ourselves, he insisted, while my grandmother's face creased with worry. Dad started drinking more heavily, not every night, but often enough that the recycling bin filled faster than before. He'd fall asleep watching TV, sometimes not even making it to bed. Mom became emotionally distant, going through the motions of caregiving without the warmth that once characterized her. Mornings became my responsibility. At 8 years old, I'd get up early to make cereal for Sophie and Noah when our parents slept in or had already left for work. I became the keeper of routines, making sure teeth were brushed and backpacks were ready. I'd walk Sophie to her classroom, promising to meet her after school, taking on a role no child should ever have to assume. One afternoon, I came home early from a friend's house and heard Mom on the phone. Her bedroom door was cracked open, and I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing her forehead. I don't know what our options are anymore. Lisa, she was saying to my aunt. The kids, I can't give them the life they deserve like this. We've talked about separation, but what happens to the children then? Who goes where? The cold dread that washed over me at those words still haunts me. Who goes where, as if we were furniture to be divided up in a divorce. The fighting escalated. One night, it got so bad that Dad punched a hole in the living room wall. I watched from the staircase, frozen in fear, as Mom screamed that he was out of control. Noah pulled me back to my room, where Sophie was already hiding under her blankets. The three of us huddled together on my bed, Noah's arm protectively around both of us, listening to the sounds of our family imploding. Later that week, I found Mom crying alone in the bathroom. Through the crack in the door, I could see her sitting on the closed toilet lid, shoulders shaking silently. I wanted to go to her to offer the same comfort I gave Sophie after her nightmares, but something held me back. Maybe it was the realization that some hurts were too big for a child to fix. I started creating distraction games for my siblings, elaborate forts in the basement, scavenger hunts, anything to shield them from the reality of our disintegrating home life, to give them moments of normal childhood amidst the chaos. But I couldn't distract myself from the truth. Something irreparable had broken between our parents. Dad moved into the basement guest room. The separation within our house felt like a prelude to something worse. I'd lie awake at night, listening for sounds of reconciliation that never came, imagining scenarios where they'd work things out, and we'd return to the family we'd been before. The day I found divorce papers in Mom's purse was the day hope died. I wasn't snooping intentionally. I was just looking for gum. But there they were, official-looking documents with terms like dissolution of marriage and custody arrangement. I didn't understand all the legal language, but I understood enough. This wasn't temporary. This was the end. That evening, after we were supposed to be in bed, I sat at the top of the stairs and listened to my parents discussing which child would go where. The casual way they divided us up still makes my blood run cold when I think about it. Noah should come with me, Dad said. He needs a male influence at his age. Fine, but Sophie stays with me, Mom replied. She's too young to be without her mother. I waited. My breath caught in my throat. I waited for one of them to mention me, to fight for me, to claim me as Noah and Sophie had been claimed. But the conversation moved on to financial arrangements and visitation schedules. And my name never came up. It was as if I didn't exist, as if I were invisible to the very people who gave me life. That night, I cried silently into my pillow, careful not to wake Sophie, who'd climbed into my bed again. I was facing the first devastating realization of my young life. In the redistribution of our family, there was no place set aside for me. The morning everything changed forever started like any other. I woke up early, as had become my habit, and went downstairs to make breakfast. I found Dad and Noah in the living room, suitcases packed beside them. Dad was kneeling in front of Noah, hands on his shoulders, speaking in a low, serious voice. "We're going on a trip," Dad explained when he noticed me. "Noah and I need some time away to figure things out." Noah looked confused, his eyes red-rimmed, as if he'd been crying. When he hugged me goodbye, he whispered, "I'll call you soon, I promise," his voice wobbling. I clung to him, somehow knowing this wasn't a normal trip, that something more permanent was happening. Dad barely looked at me as they left. Just a quick, "Be good for your mom, Goldie," before ushering Noah out to the car. That's when I saw them. Several garbage bags filled with clothes and toys, not luggage for a trip, but belongings for a move. After they drove away, Mom locked herself in her bedroom. I heard her sobbing through the door, but my knocks went unanswered. Sophie kept asking where Dad and Noah had gone, and I didn't know what to tell her. We ate cereal for dinner that night, and I read Sophie 3 extra stories at bedtime, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. Mom remained in her room the next day. I made peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, helped Sophie brush her teeth, and tried calling Dad's cell phone repeatedly. It went straight to voicemail every time. That night, Sophie and I slept together in my bed again, her small body curled against mine, for comfort we both desperately needed. On the third day, Mom emerged from her bedroom, looking hollow-eyed and determined. She moved around the house with robotic efficiency, pulling out suitcases and filling them with Sophie's clothes and toys. When I asked what she was doing, she paused only briefly. "Sophie, and I need a fresh start," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to stay with Aunt Lisa for a while." "What about me?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "When are we coming back home?" Mom's expression flickered between guilt and resolve. "You'll stay here for now. We'll come back for you when things settle down. I promise." I didn't believe her, but I was 8 years old and utterly powerless to stop what was happening. Sophie cried when she realized I wasn't coming, reaching for me from Mom's arms as they headed to the car. "Why can't Goldie come?" she wailed, her face red and tear-streaked. "Goldie needs to stay here in case your father comes back." Mom answered, a lie I recognized even then. "We'll be together again soon." Then they were gone, and I was alone, completely alone, at 8 years old in our house. The first day by myself, I pretended it was an adventure. I ate ice cream for breakfast, watched TV shows Mom never allowed, jumped on my parents' bed. But the freedom quickly gave way to fear as darkness fell, and the house made strange noises I'd never noticed before. I slept with all the lights on that night, Rusty curled protectively at my feet. The next morning, I realized no one had fed him, so I poured an entire box of cereal into his bowl, not knowing how much he needed, but wanting to make sure he had enough. By the third day alone, the food situation was dire. I'd exhausted the easy options. The milk had gone sour. I didn't know how to cook anything requiring a stove or oven. Rusty and I shared crackers and cheese slices. I kept calling Dad's phone, and now Mom's too, but neither answered. I left tearful messages, begging not to be left alone anymore. The silence in response was deafening. On the fourth day, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Garcia from next door stood there with a concerned expression. She'd noticed I was home alone. I lied, saying my mom had just gone to the store. But Mrs. Garcia saw through it, especially when Rusty bounded up behind me, clearly unfed. "Where are your parents, sweetie?" she asked gently. I broke down then, telling her everything through gulping sobs. How Dad took Noah, Mom took Sophie, and nobody took me. How they promised to come back, but hadn't. How I was running out of food and was scared at night. Mrs. Garcia's face transformed from concern to horror. She brought me to her house, fed me a proper meal, and called the authorities. By that evening, a social worker, Ms. Reynolds, was sitting across from me in Mrs. Garcia's living room, asking questions I didn't have answers to. "Do you know where your parents went? Do you have grandparents or other relatives nearby? How long have you been alone?" For days, Ms. Reynolds had a soft voice, but couldn't hide the pity in her eyes. That pity would become a familiar expression on the faces of adults in my life for years to come. She explained that I would need to go with her, that I couldn't stay in the empty house. She let me pack a small bag and take my stuffed bear, Howard. It was another loss in a week, full of them. The family court hearing a week later was cold and sterile, full of adults talking about me as if I weren't there. Neither of my parents appeared, though they'd apparently been notified. The judge, an older man with kind eyes but a stern mouth, declared me a ward of the state. Just like that, in less than 2 weeks, I went from being part of a family to being a case number in the foster care system. My first placement was with the Thompsons, a couple with 3 biological children who took in foster kids for the supplemental income. They weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. I slept on a pull-out couch in their basement family room. My belongings, what few I had, were kept in a black garbage bag since there was no dresser or closet for me. Their children regarded me with suspicion, never including me. I wrote letters to Noah and Sophie, pouring my heart onto paper, telling them I missed them, asking when we'd see each other again. I addressed them to Aunt Lisa's house, the only place I could think Mom and Sophie might be. They came back weeks later, marked return to sender, no forwarding address. Once, I managed to call my dad's cell phone when Mrs. Thompson wasn't paying attention. A woman answered, her voice sharp with annoyance. "He can't come to the phone." "Who is this?" "It's Goldie, his daughter." I replied, hope surging that I'd finally made contact. There was a pause. Then, "I'll tell him you called," before the line went dead. He never called back. I left messages at Aunt Lisa's house, too. My responses were vague. "Your mom is going through a lot right now," or "they'll reach out when they're ready." never a direct connection, never answers about when they were coming back for me. Gradually, I learned that both my parents had moved out of state. Dad had taken Noah to Wisconsin, where he'd found work on a large commercial project. Mom and Sophie were in Indiana with Aunt Lisa, supposedly until Mom could get on her feet. Neither had left contact information with the foster care agency. Neither had attended any of the court hearings about my custody. Neither seemed concerned about what had happened to me after they drove away. 6 months into my time with the Thompsons, a birthday card arrived for me from Noah. It had been forwarded multiple times and was weeks late. Inside was a store-bought card with a brief message. "Happy birthday, Goldie. Miss you, Noah." No return address, no phone number, just confirmation that he was alive and remembered me. I slept with that card under my pillow until it fell apart from handling. Mrs. Thompson found me crying over the tattered remains one evening. She sat beside me on the pull-out couch, awkwardly patting my back. "Sometimes families just can't stay together," she said, probably trying to be kind, but missing the mark entirely. "But you're safe here, and that's what matters." But I wasn't safe. Not really, because a month later, the Thompsons decided they wanted to focus on their biological children. And just like that, I was packing my garbage bag again, moving to a new temporary home with strangers who didn't want me either. My second placement was with the Ramirez family, who already housed 5 other foster children in a cramped 3-bedroom house. Mr. Ramirez was strict to the point of militaristic, enforcing rules about everything from bathroom schedules to homework time. Mrs. Ramirez was largely indifferent. I shared a bunk bed with 2 other girls in a room designed for one. My space consisted of 1/3 of a dresser and a plastic bin under the bed where I kept my few personal items, which now included Noah's birthday card, preserved between 2 pieces of clear packing tape. Changing schools mid-year made it difficult to make friends. I was the new girl, the foster kid with secondhand clothes, and no parents to attend school functions. I became quiet, keeping to myself and focusing on schoolwork as an escape from the chaotic foster home. Teachers largely ignored me, and the other students eventually lost interest in the novelty of my presence. One of the older foster boys, Damon, made a habit of stealing from the younger kids. He took the bracelet Mrs. Garcia had given me, the only gift I'd received since being in the system. When I confronted him, he threatened to tell the Ramirezes I'd been breaking house rules. I learned then another harsh lesson in the foster system. Sometimes you have to choose which losses you can live with. Social workers came and went with alarming frequency. Each knew less about my case than the last, reading from a file that contained basic facts, but none of the emotional context of my abandonment. They'd ask standard questions, and I learned to say what they wanted to hear, knowing that complaining rarely led to improvements and often resulted in more disruption. During one visit, a particularly rushed social worker mentioned casually that they'd received an update about my siblings. Noah was playing baseball in a Wisconsin Little League and doing well in school. Sophie had adjusted to her new life in Indiana and was taking dance classes. They were thriving while I was surviving. The contrast was a bitter pill to swallow. After 8 months with the Ramirezes, I was moved again, this time to the Williams family. On the surface, they seemed perfect, a tidy suburban home. Mrs. Williams, who baked cookies for after-school snacks. Mr. Williams, who coached Little League. For the first time, I had my own room with an actual bed, dresser, and desk. I dared to hope this might be different, but appearances can be deceiving. Mrs. Williams's warm homemaker persona disappeared behind closed doors, replaced by cutting remarks and impossible standards. Nothing I did was ever good enough. My grades, despite being mostly A's, could be higher. My chores were never completed to her satisfaction. My appearance was constantly critiqued. Why can't you make it look neat? Stand up straight. You're not a hunchback. The verbal abuse was constant, but careful, never crossing lines that would trigger mandatory reporting. You're so lazy. No wonder your parents didn't want you, she'd say, smiling at Mr. Williams. Or, if you were my real daughter, I'd be embarrassed to take you anywhere while driving me to school. I learned to become invisible in that house, to speak only when spoken to anticipate needs before they were expressed. I developed insomnia, lying awake, planning how to avoid criticism the next day. My school performance began to suffer as exhaustion took its toll, giving Mrs. Williams more ammunition. After a year with the Williams family, I was moved to what would become my worst placement, the Jackson house. Mr. Jackson was rarely home, working night shifts. Mrs. Jackson collected foster kids for the checks, spending the money on herself while keeping us on strict food rations. Meals were monitored, snacks forbidden, and food was regularly withheld as punishment. At 14, hungry and desperate, I ran away. I spent 3 days living in a park, sleeping on benches, and stealing food from grocery stores before police found me and returned me to the foster care system. The Jacksons didn't want me back after my stunt, so I entered yet another temporary home. It was during this transition period that my high school counselor, Miss Rivera, noticed something in me that I'd long stopped seeing in myself: potential. Despite my spotty attendance and inconsistent performance, my standardized test scores were exceptional. Miss Rivera began advocating for me, suggesting advanced placement classes, and connecting me with school resources I hadn't known existed. "You're smart, Goldie," she told me during one of our weekly meetings. "Really smart. And that brain of yours is your ticket out of the situation you're in." My new placement was with Miss Harriet, an older single woman who had fostered dozens of teenagers. She was neither overly affectionate nor coldly distant, instead offering clear boundaries and consistent expectations. Her house was modest but comfortable, with bookshelves lining nearly every wall. "I don't expect you to call me Mom," she said on my first night. "I'm not trying to replace anyone, but while you're here, you'll have stability, respect, and opportunities. What you make of them is up to you." For the first time in years, I experienced genuine stability. Miss Harriet maintained the same routines day after day. She checked my assignments, not to criticize, but to offer help. She attended parent-teacher conferences and advocated for me. I discovered solace in art during those years with Miss Harriet. She noticed me doodling constantly and bought me proper sketch pads and pencils. I spent hours in my room drawing, expressing on paper the emotions I couldn't verbalize. Miss Harriet never cried, but she did hang my better pieces in the hallway, a quiet acknowledgement of my talent. By my junior year, Miss Rivera and Miss Harriet were both encouraging me to consider college, something that had seemed impossible before. They helped me research scholarships for foster youth and guided me through application essays. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future beyond the system that had defined my adolescence. Then, during my senior year, Miss Harriet received a diagnosis of terminal cancer. She told me directly, without drama, "I have 6 months, maybe less," she said over our regular Sunday breakfast. "I've updated my will and spoken to your social worker. You'll need a new placement to finish out the school year." I was 17, less than a year away from aging out of the system anyway. The thought of another move was exhausting. But more than that, I was facing the loss of the only adult who had consistently shown up for me in nearly a decade. Miss Harriet declined quickly. Within 3 months, she was in hospice care, and I was back in a temporary placement, this time with a couple who fostered mainly for religious reasons and tried daily to convert me. I visited Miss Harriet every day after school until she passed, holding her hand and reading aloud from her favorite books. Her funeral was small but dignified, attended mainly by former foster kids whose lives she had touched. We were a motley crew, united by our experience in her home. It was the first time since my family's abandonment that I felt genuine grief, a measure of how rare meaningful connections had become in my life. 2 months later, I turned 18 and aged out of the foster care system. I had a high school diploma, acceptance to community college based on scholarships for former foster youth, and $752 in savings from part-time jobs. I had no family to call, no home to return to, and no safety net if I failed. With my meager savings, I secured a spot in a shared apartment with 3 other girls, all students at different colleges around Chicago. The apartment was small, the neighborhood questionable, but it was the first space that felt truly mine. I enrolled in community college while working 2 jobs, morning shifts at a local diner and evenings at a retail store. Between work and classes, I averaged 5 hours of sleep a night, but the exhaustion felt purposeful, different from the bone-deep weariness of my years in foster care. This tiredness came with paychecks, with credits accumulating toward a degree, with forward momentum. During my second semester, I enrolled in an art history class as an elective. The professor, Dr. Mason, noticed my drawings in the margins of my notes and asked to see more of my work. Reluctantly, I showed him my sketchbook, expecting vague encouragement. Instead, he was genuinely impressed. "You have a natural understanding of composition and light," he said, flipping through pages of my portraits and landscapes. "Have you considered pursuing art seriously?" The thought had never crossed my mind. Art had been my escape, my therapy, never a potential career. But Dr. Mason's interest sparked something. He connected me with the college's art department, helped me apply for a scholarship, and mentored me through building a proper portfolio. By the end of my second year, I'd secured a full scholarship to complete my bachelor's degree at the state university. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel genuine pride in my accomplishments, to recognize that I'd created opportunities for myself despite starting with nothing. Moving into university housing introduced me to Zoe, who would become my first real best friend since childhood. She was studying business, practical and ambitious, but with a creativity that complemented my artistic tendencies. We stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, the kind of easy friendship I'd observed others having but never experienced. "You never talk about your family," she noted one night as we shared a pizza. "Don't have one," I replied, the practiced casualness of years smoothing over the pain of the admission. Zoe didn't push, didn't offer empty sympathy. She just nodded and said, "Well, you can share mine for holidays if you want. My mom always cooks enough for an army anyway." That simple offer of inclusion meant more than she could know. For the next 3 years, I spent Thanksgivings and Christmases with Zoe's boisterous family, watching their easy affection, learning what healthy family dynamics looked like. It was both healing and painful, a glimpse of what I'd missed, but also what was possible. During my junior year, I secured a work-study position at the campus gallery, assisting with installations and administrative tasks. I discovered I had a talent not just for creating art, but for curating it, for understanding how pieces work together to tell a cohesive story. I found myself drawn to the business side as much as the creative aspects, fascinated by the intersection of art and commerce. That same year, I met James in an advanced painting class. He was thoughtful and patient, never pushing for more information than I was ready to give about my past. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared interests. He was the first person I told the full story of my abandonment, sitting on his apartment floor at 3 a.m., words spilling out after years of careful containment. "I kept waiting for you to have trust issues," he said when I'd finished. I laughed through tears. "What do you think this is? I've known you for 8 months, and I'm just now telling you why I never talk about my childhood." He smiled, pushing my hair back from my face. Fair point. But you're here. You're letting me in. That takes incredible courage after what you've been through. James helped me see that my defensive walls, while necessary for survival, were also preventing me from fully experiencing life. With his encouragement, I began therapy through the University Counseling Center, finally addressing the abandonment trauma I'd carried alone for so long. Graduation came with a bittersweet triumph. I received my diploma with honors, walked across the stage to the cheers of Zoe and James, but felt the absence of family acutely. No parents beaming with pride, no siblings waving enthusiastically. Even after all those years, there was still a hollow space where those connections should have been. After graduation, I leveraged my gallery experience into an assistant position at a small contemporary art space in Chicago. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was in my field, a foot in the door of the art world. I shared an apartment with Zoe, who'd secured an entry-level marketing job, and continued my therapy sessions, determined to build a healthier relationship with my past. My career progressed steadily. Within 2 years, I was promoted to associate curator, responsible for discovering new artists and conceptualizing exhibitions. The gallery director recognized my eye for emerging talent and my ability to communicate with artists effectively, skills that set me apart. But personal growth wasn't as straightforward as professional advancement. One day, walking down Michigan Avenue, I spotted a man who resembled my father. Same build, same gait, same way of tilting his head. The panic attack hit without warning, leaving me gasping for breath on a busy sidewalk, disoriented and suddenly 8 years old again, watching him drive away with my brother. That incident sent me back to therapy with renewed commitment. I needed to address not just the abandonment itself, but the ongoing impact it had on my daily life, the way it colored my relationships and self-perception. I began to understand that healing wasn't a destination, but a process, one I would likely be engaged in for the rest of my life. During this time, I cultivated a close circle of friends who became the family I chose for myself. Besides Zoe, there was Marcus, a chef who hosted elaborate dinner parties, Elena, a librarian with an encyclopedic knowledge of obscure facts, and David, a software developer with a dry wit that never failed to make me laugh. We created our own traditions and support systems, showing up for each other in ways my biological family never had. Weekend brunches, holiday gatherings, movie nights, impromptu dance parties. These rituals replaced the family traditions I'd lost, creating new memories to overlay the painful ones. After 3 years of saving every spare dollar, I took the leap and opened my own small gallery. The space was modest, a former bookstore in a neighborhood on the edge of gentrification, but it was mine. I focused on showcasing local artists who might otherwise struggle to find representation, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds similar to my own. The gallery's success exceeded my expectations. Art critics praised my fresh eye and uncanny ability to spot talent before it broke. Local publications featured the space. Artists sought me out, trusting that I would represent their work with integrity and understanding. By 29, I had enough financial stability to buy my first condo, a 1-bedroom in a converted warehouse with high ceilings, perfect for displaying the art I'd begun collecting. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I sat alone in the empty space, keys in hand, and wept, not from sadness, but from a profound realization. I had created security for myself. After years of temporary homes and borrowed spaces, I had tangible proof that I could provide what my parents had failed to give me. My relationship with Michael began during this period of stability and success. He was an architect who came to one of my gallery openings, more interested in the building's features than the art, until I caught him studying a particularly challenging installation with genuine curiosity. Unlike James, who had helped me begin my healing journey, but ultimately wanted more emotional openness than I could offer. Michael understood boundaries. Having lost his own mother at a young age, he recognized the particular resilience that comes from navigating significant early loss. "We're both building our lives from scratch," he observed on our third date. "There's something beautiful about that, creating exactly what you want without the weight of expectations." For years, I'd conducted periodic searches for my family online, looking up Noah and Sophie's names, checking social media. These searches became less frequent as I built my own life. The desperate need to reconnect gradually replaced by curiosity, then by something approaching indifference. I made a conscious decision to stop searching, to focus on the present and future rather than a past I couldn't change. I found peace in accepting that family could be chosen, that blood ties were only one type of connection. The people who showed up for my gallery openings, who helped me move into my condo, who remembered my birthday without reminders, who held me when old grief surfaced unexpectedly, these were my real family. They had earned that designation through consistent presence and care, not through genetic obligation. By my early 30s, I had created a life that felt whole and meaningful. I ran a successful gallery, owned my home, maintained loving friendships, and had a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. The abandoned 8-year-old was still part of me, but she no longer defined me. I had become someone she could be proud of, someone who had transformed abandonment into independence, rejection into self-reliance, loss into creativity. I thought I had made peace with my past. Then Noah found me on Facebook, and everything I thought I'd resolved came rushing back with devastating clarity. The message arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was in my office at the gallery, coffee in hand, reviewing submissions. The notification pinged, and I clicked it absently, expecting a client. Instead, I found myself staring at a name I hadn't seen in 20 years. Noah Winters. The coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the hardwood floor, hot liquid splashing my ankles. I barely noticed. My entire focus narrowed to the small rectangle of text on my screen. "Goldie, it's Noah, your brother. I don't know if you remember me, but I've been looking for you for years. I just found your gallery website. Can we talk, please?" I stared at the message for so long that my assistant came to check on me, concerned by the crash and subsequent silence. She helped clean up the spilled coffee while I sat immobile, unable to process the sudden intrusion of my past into my carefully constructed present. It took 2 days for me to respond. 2 days of discussing the situation with my therapist, with Michael, with Zoe. 2 days of weighing the potential benefits of reconnection against the certain disruption it would cause. My response was brief. "I remember you. We can talk." Noah responded immediately with his phone number. When I called, his voice was deeper than I remembered, but with the same cadence, the same slight hesitation before important words. "I can't believe I found you," he said, emotion making his voice thick. "I've been searching on and off for years." "Why now?" I asked, the question burning in me. The story unfolded gradually over that call, and several that followed. Noah was married now, with 2 children. He'd built a life as an engineer in Wisconsin, not far from where our father had initially taken him. He'd searched for me sporadically, but with limited information. His efforts had gone nowhere. "Dad didn't want us to contact you at first," he explained. "Said it would be confusing for everyone. That clean breaks were better. By the time I was old enough to make my own decisions, I didn't know where to start looking." It was during a recent family health scare that Noah had renewed his efforts to find me, diving deeper into online searches until he discovered my gallery website with a professional biography that confirmed I was the sister he'd been seeking. "Sophie's been looking for you, too," he added, dropping another bombshell. "She never stopped talking about you, even when we were all supposed to pretend the past didn't happen." Piece by piece, I learned what had happened to my family after they drove away and left me behind. Dad's construction business eventually stabilized in Wisconsin, though he never achieved the success he dreamed of. He'd remarried briefly when Noah was in high school, a relationship that ended when his drinking became problematic. He was single now in his early 60s, with developing health problems, living in a small apartment in Milwaukee. Mom had stayed with Aunt Lisa in Indiana for only a few months before moving to Ohio with Sophie for a fresh start. She'd remarried when Sophie was 10, a stable, kind man who'd been a good stepfather. She still worked as a nurse, now in management. According to Noah, she expressed regret over how things happened with me, though she'd never made concrete efforts to find me or make amends. Sophie had become a teacher, working with elementary school children. She'd been engaged twice, but never married, breaking off both relationships. She lived in Columbus, within an hour of our mother, but maintaining what Noah described as healthy boundaries with her. There's going to be a family reunion, Noah said during our fourth call. Dad's turning 60, and it seems like the health scare made everyone realize time isn't infinite. They all want you to come. Asterisk. They all want me to come? Asterisk, I repeated the words, feeling foreign in my mouth. The same people who left me alone in an empty house when I was 8 years old. Noah's discomfort was palpable. It was a terrible time for everyone. Goldie. Dad was barely functioning. Mom was having what we now know was a major depressive episode. They made horrible decisions, but they've changed. And you think that excuses abandoning a child? I asked, anger finally breaking through the shock. No, of course not. He backpedaled. Nothing excuses that. But people can regret their worst mistakes, right? They want a chance to apologize, to try to make things right. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Make things right? I spent 10 years in the foster system. Noah, do you have any idea what that was like? He didn't. Of course. How could he? While I was moving from home to home, belongings in garbage bags, he was living with our father, playing baseball, having a normal adolescence despite the family fracture. I found myself in an uncomfortable position, a messenger between parts of my family who hadn't communicated directly in years. Noah spoke with Sophie regularly, but had limited contact with our parents. Sophie talked to our mother weekly, but rarely engaged with our father. Everyone, it seemed, had complicated relationships with each other, but were united in their sudden desire to reconnect with me. Sophie called a week after Noah's initial contact. Her voice was both familiar and strange, the little girl's high pitch replaced by a woman's tones, but with the same emotional openness I remembered. I never forgot you, she said, crying within minutes. I had this picture of you from my 6th birthday party. I kept it hidden because it made Mom sad to see it, but I looked at it every night before bed for years. Unlike Noah, who approached our reconnection with careful pragmatism, Sophie swung between tearful nostalgia and enthusiastic plans for making up for lost time. She wanted immediate closeness, suggesting visits and shared holidays, as if 2 decades of separation could be bridged in a single leap. When I asked why she hadn't looked for me sooner, her answer revealed the family mythology that had developed in my absence. I thought you were with Grandma and Grandpa, she admitted. That's what Mom told me when I was little. By the time I found out the truth in high school, no one seemed to know where you were. The reasons offered for my abandonment varied depending on who was explaining. Noah cited financial strain and our parents' mental health struggles. Sophie mentioned poor decision-making during crisis. Both acknowledged it was wrong, but framed it as a tragic mistake rather than the deliberate choice it had been. I learned that our parents had told extended family that I was living with an aunt during those years, a fiction that preserved their image as caring parents who had simply been overwhelmed by circumstances. No one had questioned this narrative deeply enough to uncover the truth, that I had been left alone and subsequently entered state care. My friends were divided on how I should respond. Zoe was protective, suspicious of their motives, and concerned about the emotional toll. "They abandoned you once," she pointed out bluntly. "What's to stop them from disappearing again when it gets difficult?" Michael was more measured, suggesting I proceed with caution, but remain open to the possibility of healing on my terms. "You don't owe them forgiveness," he said, "but you might find some peace in hearing them out." My therapist helped me navigate the complex emotions that surfaced. The anger I thought I'd processed returned with fresh intensity. The grief over lost years felt raw again, and underneath it all, a small, persistent voice that belonged to the 8-year-old still inside me. Asterisk, why didn't they want me then? Why do they want me now? Asterisk, I agreed to meet Noah for coffee when he came to Chicago for a work conference. Seeing him in person was surreal, like looking at a funhouse mirror version of our father. His features familiar, yet altered by time. He had Dad's height and build, but carried himself differently, without the restless energy I remembered. His children called me Aunt Goldie during a video call he initiated at the coffee shop, the title feeling both foreign and painful. These children who shared my blood but knew nothing about me, who had been told stories about an aunt who existed primarily in their father's childhood memories. "Dad wants to talk to you," Noah said toward the end of our meeting, his discomfort evident. "He's not well, Goldie. The doctors are talking about 6 months, maybe a year. He wants to make peace before he trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. The request for forgiveness from a dying man should perhaps have moved me, but it only intensified my anger. Why was I expected to provide absolution on his timeline? Where had this desire for reconciliation been during the years when I needed a father? A package arrived at my gallery the following week. The return address showed my mother's name in Ohio, sending a jolt through me at the sight of her handwriting. Inside was a worn teddy bear I'd thought lost forever, my childhood companion, Howard. A note read, asterisk, "I kept him safe for you. I should have kept you safe, too. I'm so sorry, Goldie. Please call when you're ready. Love, Mom." Asterisk the presumption in that signature, claiming a relationship she had forfeited 2 decades earlier, made me set the note aside. But I kept Howard, placing him on a shelf in my bedroom, a tangible link to the child I had been. The formal invitation to the family reunion arrived next, an awkwardly worded card requesting my presence at a lake house in Michigan, the same place we'd vacationed as an intact family. The location was clearly chosen for its sentimental value, but the memories it evoked for me were complicated, tainted by the knowledge of what came after those seemingly happy times. I stood at a crossroads, pulled between the family I had lost and the life I had built without them. They were asking me to step back into a role I had long outgrown, the youngest daughter, the baby sister, the missing piece in their family portrait. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had become someone else entirely in their absence, forged by experiences they knew nothing about and could never truly understand. The decision I made about whether to attend that reunion would define not just my relationship with my biological family moving forward, but my relationship with myself and the journey that had brought me to this point. After weeks of deliberation and intensive therapy sessions, I made my decision. I would meet with my family, but not on their terms. Not at the lake house with its complicated memories. Not as part of a celebratory reunion, pretending 2 decades of abandonment could be erased with cake and nostalgic reminiscing. Instead, I proposed a dinner at a neutral location, a restaurant near my gallery, where I would feel on solid ground. I wrote detailed letters to each family member beforehand, explaining exactly what had happened to me after they left. Not the sanitized version they might have imagined, but the harsh reality of foster care. The Thompsons with their black garbage bags for my belongings. Mrs. Williams with her cutting remarks. The Jacksons who used food as punishment, the constant relocations, the loss of all stability, the years of feeling unwanted and disposable. I'm not writing this to hurt you. I explained in each letter. But because if there's going to be any relationship moving forward, it needs to be based on truth, not comfortable fictions. You need to know who I became in your absence. Michael offered to accompany me to the dinner, a buffer against whatever emotional storm might await. I appreciated his support, but declined. This was something I needed to face alone, on my terms, with the strength I built over a lifetime of self-reliance. The evening of our meeting, I arrived early, selecting a table that gave me a clear view of the entrance. I watched as they arrived together. My estranged family, instantly recognizable despite the years of separation. Dad, thinner than I remembered, hair now gray, moving with the careful steps of someone managing pain. Mom, her face lined but still beautiful, nervously adjusting her necklace as she entered. Noah hovering protectively near Dad's elbow. Sophie, eyes scanning the restaurant anxiously until they landed on me. The shock of seeing them together after 24 years was physical, a tightness in my chest that momentarily stole my breath. These people who shared my blood, who once formed the entirety of my world, were now strangers with familiar faces. I stood as they approached, accepting brief, awkward hugs from each. The physical contact, both alien and achingly familiar. "You look so beautiful," Mom said, tears already forming in her eyes. "So grown up." "That tends to happen in 20 years, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotional turbulence beneath the surface. The initial conversation was strained, filled with safe topics and careful questions. How was my gallery doing? Did I enjoy living in Chicago? Was I seeing anyone special? I answered politely, but briefly, watching as they exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to navigate the massive gulf between us. Dad cleared his throat during a lull. "Goldie, we owe you an apology. What happened? What we did? There's no excuse for it. But there were reasons." Mom interjected quickly. "We were in such a terrible place, financially, emotionally. I was suffering from depression, though I didn't recognize it then. Your father was drinking too much. We thought we were making the best decision for everyone at the time." I looked at her steadily. What exactly was the best decision for me, Mom? Being left alone in an empty house at 8 years old. The table fell silent. Sophie looked down at her plate, while Noah shifted uncomfortably. Dad's face flushed with shame, or anger, I couldn't tell which. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," he finally said. "I thought your mom was taking you. She thought you were coming with me. By the time we realized what had happened, you were already in the system, and we were told it would be complicated to get you back." Complicated. I repeated the word, tasting bitter. "So, you decided not to try because it was complicated?" "I couldn't handle all 3 kids alone," Dad admitted, not meeting my eyes. "I was barely managing with Noah. And Sophie needed me completely," Mom added. "She was so young, so confused by everything." I took a deep breath, centering myself before responding. "I understand that you both were struggling. I can even accept that you made decisions from a place of desperation. What I can't understand is why neither of you came back for me, why you never called, never wrote, never tried to find out if I was okay." "We did try." Mom insisted. "We called the social worker a few times, but they said you were placed with a good family, that disrupting your new situation might cause more harm than good." I laughed without humor. "A good family? Do you want to know how many good families I lived with?" I proceeded to recount my placements, naming each family and what life had been like in their homes. I recited dates, locations, specific incidents that had burned themselves into my memory. July 15th, 2002, the Thompsons decided to focus on their biological children. so I was moved to the Ramirez house with 5 other foster kids. March 3rd, 2004. Mrs. Williams told me I was too stupid to ever amount to anything because I got a B- on a math test. November 28th, 2005. The Jacksons locked the refrigerator over Thanksgiving weekend because I ate too much at the holiday meal. As I spoke, I watched their faces change from defensive justification to uncomfortable recognition of the reality I had lived. This wasn't the sanitized version of foster care from heartwarming movies. This was the system as it actually existed for many children. A series of temporary homes with adults who saw you as a source of income or an obligation, rarely as a child deserving of love and stability. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I said when I'd finished. I'm telling you because this is who I am. These experiences shaped me. If you want to know me now, you need to understand what happened to me then. I then delivered my prepared statement about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I can forgive what happened without pretending it didn't affect me. I can move forward without erasing the past. But any relationship we build has to acknowledge the reality of those 20 years, not just sweep them under the rug. I set clear boundaries for what I was willing to accept. No instant family reunions. No pretending we could pick up where we left off. No expectation that I would seamlessly integrate into family traditions I'd never been part of. Individual relationships might be possible, built slowly and with respect for who we all were now, not who we had been or who they wished I was. I won't be attending the reunion at the lake house. I concluded. That's too much, too soon, in a place that holds complicated memories for me. I'm open to getting to know each of you individually on neutral ground, if that's something you want. But I need to be clear. I have a full life with people who have been there for me consistently. They're my family too, and they will remain my priority. Their reactions varied. Dad became defensive, initially arguing that they had suffered too, that they'd made mistakes, but hadn't intended the consequences. Mom cried, repeating that she'd never stopped loving me, that she thought about me every day. Noah seemed relieved that everything was finally being spoken aloud after years of family secrets. Sophie listened intently, occasionally reaching toward me as if wanting to establish a physical connection, but respecting my space. After dinner, I left with my dignity intact, not seeking their approval or absolution, but standing in my truth. The frightened, abandoned child had become a woman who could face her past without being diminished by it. In the weeks that followed, I met Sophie for coffee, just the two of us, without our parents present. She spoke more freely about her own struggles growing up with a mother who battled depression and a stepfather who, while kind, had never fully understood the complex dynamics of their blended family. We began building a tentative relationship based on who we were now, not the children we had been. When the family Christmas invitation came, I declined politely, suggesting instead that we continue with smaller, more manageable interactions. I wasn't ready for holiday celebrations that would inevitably highlight the years of traditions I'd missed, the inside jokes I wouldn't understand, the family photographs that didn't include me. The experience prompted a new direction in my artwork. I created a series about abandonment and healing, abstract pieces that explored the journey from fragmentation to wholeness. The exhibition received critical acclaim, with reviewers noting the raw, emotional honesty and powerful resilience evident in the work. I didn't explicitly share the personal story behind the art publicly, but those who knew me understood its significance. 6 months after our dinner, my father called. His health had deteriorated further, and his tone was different, less defensive, more reflective. I failed you, he said simply, not just when you were 8, but every day after that, when I could have tried to find you, and didn't. I can't change it, but I wanted you to know that I know it. I know what I did. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It wasn't even really forgiveness in the traditional sense, but it was an acknowledgement of truth. And that meant something. I've come to understand that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened or pretending it didn't cause harm. It's about releasing yourself from the burden of anger, not for the benefit of those who hurt you, but for your own peace. I forgave my parents not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the weight of resentment. Family is a concept I've had to define for myself. It includes the people who share my DNA, with whom I'm building careful, boundary-laden relationships. But it also encompasses the friends who showed up consistently, the mentors who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, the partner who understands my complex history without trying to fix or erase it. Family is who loves you, not just who shares your blood. The abandoned 8-year-old girl still lives within me. I honor her courage, her resilience, her determination to survive when it seemed the whole world had turned its back on her. But she is no longer defining me. She is a part of my story, not its entirety. In my gallery office, I have 2 photographs side by side. One is the picture Sophie kept all those years, showing a gap-toothed little girl with hopeful eyes. The other is a recent self-portrait, showing a woman with strength in her gaze and confidence in her stance. Both are me. Both are true. Both deserve to be seen. Have you ever had to rebuild your definition of family after loss or separation? And do you believe forgiveness is truly possible without forgetting? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.